All right.
So we're very happy to have a couple of guests join us this week. And we're going to really deal with a difficult topic, one that's, I think, been center of mind for pretty much everybody for the last 2 weeks, really. And this has to do with police violence. Those of you that have listened to this podcast before know that we started this with the intention of talking about, what might be difficult political topics with a view towards understanding the other person's perspective and seeing what end goals we might have that might be similar, even though we might disagree on the means of achieving those goals. And so we are really lucky to have two people with a lot of credentials to help us understand the mindset that might be influencing police violence, and specifically also their perspective of their background as Black men who have or who are at higher likelihood of being recipients of or having police violence. Let me restart. Sorry about that. I just totally went off. I couldn't find my way back. So we're very happy to have with us this week a couple of guests for our podcast. Those of you that have listened to us before know that we have started this podcast with the intention of talking about difficult political issues that we hope to gain understanding from people with different political viewpoints. The idea of being charitable towards those viewpoints and trying to understand and find what similar goals we might have, even though we might differ in the means of achieving those goals. And so we're really lucky to have a couple of guests who have a lot of background and experience on the psychology and understanding of police violence, specifically against Black men, and really interested in hearing their viewpoints on this topic. We wanted to say that there is some, what I'll say is, I guess, ambiguity on the known risk of Black males. I'm sure that some of you have seen literature that makes it seem like the risk for Black males is not higher. We'll say that one of our guests and I, Steve, have been looking at this literature, and in one of the specific ones, which was from the National Academy of Sciences, did show an increased risk of Black men, a lifetime risk of dying as a result of police violence. And so, there's other literature out there. It's a very complicated topic because of some of the confounding factors. But I would say, in my view, I view this as the likelihood that this is true, in my view, is very high. And so that's just my perspective. I'd encourage you to look at the literature. Real quick, we'll go through introductions of each other. So I'm Chad, and we'll go through introductions of our guests as well.
So Peter, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. I'm Peter Vercio. This is a subject I've read about quite a bit. I think from a young age, I grew up in Guam, where I actually, as a white man, was a minority. And so it made me acutely aware of race at a pretty young age that I think most white men wouldn't be. And so I have grown up with the privilege of, my worst case scenario most times with police officers is getting a ticket. So I won't say that I have any experience around the fear that I think is pervasive in the Black community around the police. But it's something that I've spent a lot of time learning about and reading about, and I got a degree in history, and so I like to study things all around, and started studying Huey P. Newton and things like that at a pretty young age. So that's a little bit of my background in relation to this topic, I guess I should say.
My name is Steve, and it's a pleasure to be part of this podcast, so thanks for inviting me. My background is in the field of psychology. Although I have more careers than just psychology, I've been through about 2 or 3 careers. But psychology is the current one and the most rewarding one. I grew up in England in a British society. I grew up in an all-white community, and I attended a school where I was the only Black student at that high school. And so I've experienced what it's like to grow up in a predominantly white community, having my social circles, my friends were all white. And so, you know, I have come to have that kind of experience, good and bad. So along the lines of the podcast tonight, I may have to refer to one of those experiences that would maybe flesh out some of the ideas that I might want to present today. Currently, I am working in a hospital, a forensic psychiatric hospital, as well as I conduct private practice in the local community where I live.
Thank you, Steve. All right, Dorian.
Yeah, my name is Dorian, and like Steve, I've had several careers. Currently, I'm an intern, psychology intern, and been a police officer, 3 different cities here in California for about 30 years. And where I live now, currently, I grew up in pretty much in the Riverside County area of California, which I can honestly say that they're predominantly white at the time when I was going to school, and just an interesting experience. And just listening to some of the comments when when I was growing up and here, and just interesting. I've also been I was a kid during the Watts riots, so I saw a lot at that particular time when that was going on, and how the police were literally murdering people. So, you know, and they were able to get away with it because of under the color of authority, from the fact that it's a riot and people are looting and the whatnot. And then during the, what was the last one where the guy was getting beat up by LAPD?
Oh, Rodney King.
Rodney King, yeah. I was working at that particular time as a police officer. So.
Wow.
Which county were you in at that time?
LA County.
Wow.
I mean, I was literally, the street where it took place was it separated one of the cities from the other city, from the LA, from the city of Los Angeles.
Wow.
So we were busy that night.
Yeah.
And for a few days thereafter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a tense time.
Yeah.
So I didn't know you'd grown up in Riverside. I was talking to one of my colleagues from work yesterday, and her mom was one of the first Black students. She was, I think, in elementary school when they integrated in like 1960 something. And so she remembers being the only Black kid in her classroom.
Yeah.
And yeah, we haven't been able to fully hear, or I haven't been able to fully hear about that experience, but it sounded like it was one of kind of confusion for both sides, of not necessarily dislike, but just confusion of I've never interacted with someone from your culture before.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the growing up in, I guess, with Kansas or the Board of Education and the whole nine.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dorian.
No, I lived in Los Angeles for quite a while until we moved out here in Riverside, and then that's when I ended up going to a couple of high schools here. Actually, 3, to be honest with you, during my sophomore year.
Oh, wow.
So and all in Riverside County, starting with Paris and then Northern Vista and Ramona.
Okay.
And then I was a high school teacher too. I forgot to mention that.
Oh wow, you've had a lot of careers.
Yeah.
Done a lot of things.
Yeah.
So you don't look old. You have good genes.
67, so I'm doing okay.
No way. I would never have guessed that. And I'm sure Steve also looks quite young.
He's a youngster. He's a baby.
So wanted to start with, and maybe we'll start with you, Dorian. What has been your perspective what has been your experience over the last couple of weeks? Seeing George Floyd, this, horrific event. And what's been your experience of that? The way that you've kind of internalized or processed that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was part of the training cadre when I was in Inglewood. So weaponless defense was what we taught. Never, ever, and like I discussed this with Steve for quite a while, and the discussion basically was, because Steve asked me, well, how could you tell, by a look? But the look on what's his name, Chad Chauvin is
Derek Chauvin.
Yeah, it was Derek Chauvin. I don't know how to say his last name.
Refer to him as Chauvin, but I think that's his first name. And I could tell, because I've seen that look several times, and the look is that I'm going to do the best I can to hurt this guy. But in what I could see is that when he put his knee on his neck, there was absolutely no real emotion. It's like, okay, we'll just see how long this is going to take, and never lit up off of it. Anytime you put any type of pressure on your carotid artery, you're cutting off the oxygen to the brain. The guy actually urinated on himself. George Floyd did. And then when people are telling him for 8 minutes to get off of him, it was heart-wrenching to hear this guy call for his mother, who was dead. For George. And I don't know what that guy's beef was. I know that they worked together at a club, and apparently there was something that took place, but the guy was on a mission. The officer was on a mission. Never let up, looking at his watch, and it's like, hey, and everybody's telling him, hey, we need to turn this guy over. At least the trainee did, but trainees don't have any juice. They don't have any power.
Right.
So, and the alpha dog there was Chauvin. So,
yeah,
what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
But anyway, it was very disturbing to see that, and even more heart-wrenching because I had seen it before, and I was thinking, okay, policing has gotten past that, but it hasn't.
Yeah.
I do believe this incident is going to be world-changing. I can see a difference in all the past riots compared to now, and I'm not approving the violence, because I truly don't like that. But the bottom line is that there's a major difference in people's attitudes in the world that's going to make a change in how these things are going to happen. And they're talking about, well, we're going to take the use of the carotid hold off and make it illegal. It's already on the books. It's already a law. It's just one of salutary neglect, and that's the reason why they don't. A lot of people don't even realize that it's on the books.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, Steve. What's been your kind of experience?
Well, George Floyd's murder is a lens for a lot of things, but on a personal level, it was just so painful for me, emotionally painful. You know, it was vicariously traumatic for me.
Mhm.
It stirred up my own memories of when I was a victim of racial discrimination.
Mhm.
And I kind of found myself re-experiencing this belittled self that was quite disturbing for me. And then on the other hand, there's this, as the days go on, and to realize that this can happen in broad daylight in 2020, I started having some anticipatory anxiety, that it's going to continue. And so, I developed a kind of fear for myself and for my son, you know. And there was a kind of sadness with this anticipation that, his potential will be somehow or another be stymied by discrimination the same way I was. And
Mhm.
so these are some of the thoughts that went on. Um, and I felt quite demoralized. Um, this foreboding sense of kind of overall failure. Despite I'm speaking now for, from a Black community standpoint. We failed. We've had civil rights. We've had the Black vote. We've had a Black president. You know, we have Black billionaires, Oprah. We've had Black sportsmen excelling to the pinnacle of excellence with millions of dollars to boot. And with all of that, it still felt like abject failure. It's a state of helplessness. It's as if, even my own successes, I'm looking at, well, I fail because I'm having this sense of um, disrespect, you know, um, with Black people, with all of the efforts that I've done, with all of the efforts that I've made. Um, we failed to garner respect, and we fail to be counted as basically equal with other groups of people. And so there was this feeling of kind of a learned helplessness that I felt, and emotionally very, very sad and defeated and demoralized.
Yeah. Steve, can you say a little bit more about, if you're willing to, the experience of discrimination you had in the past and how this kind of reactivated or amplified that previous experience?
Yeah, and why I use the phrase, vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma was I was traumatized by the present event, but also there was a flashback of my own trauma. And typically, you don't get to really understand how traumatic things are unless you encounter some trigger later on down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the traumatic event was, I think I was about 12 or 13 years old. I lived in the town of Stretford, and I went to Stretford Grammar School, which the kids there have a little bit of head. And we didn't go to the comprehensive school, which is a few miles away, where you find more minorities. So I was fortunate to go to a school that was not a comprehensive school. It's called a grammar school. So, you had to wear blazers and ties and all of that. Um, but then there was Manchester Grammar. Manchester Grammar is a little bit more uppity than Stretford Grammar. It's the creme de la creme of the British schoolboy schools. And what used to happen is because there were some kids in Stretford who went to Manchester Grammar, but they had to be bused to Manchester Grammar and bused home. Because I lived in Stretford, we didn't get a school bus. We had to get the local bus. We'd jump on the bus and go home. So I'm there after school waiting at the bus stop. And so the school bus of Manchester Grammar came along, stopped. I couldn't get on it because it was a school bus. I had to get the local bus. But it was filled with kids from Manchester Grammar. So some kids were let off, but as the bus began to move off, it's double-decker buses, the kids upstairs covered me in saliva. I was completely gassed, and I just stood there with saliva in my face, saliva on my bag, and it's as if they prepared, you know, no one just spits kind of spontaneously with so much in their mouth.
Yeah.
And that to me, I relived those belittling feelings that I have when I saw George Floyd absolutely helpless and being dominated by this person. So that's an example of me reliving a past traumatic experience triggered by, you know, the domination and the belittling of George Floyd.
Yeah, and I would guess that, you know, that what you're describing has happened for a lot of people over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That, you know, this has made them recall other experiences that they've had, and maybe a lot of experiences that have, you know, either made them feel afraid for their safety, or, you know, a lot of other kind of, you know, challenging emotions to deal with.
And it's this defeating sense, you know, this conversation that you have in your head. I can never be whole. I can never be accepted. And those have defeating influences on your health and well-being.
Yeah.
So, especially like when it's based on something completely outside of your control.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you got the color of your skin for your entire life. There's no.
Yeah. And so you imagine now a Black child growing up with those messages, because I've had those messages, and I even suffer today with social anxiety. And I know it was because of those messages that still plays, is that I shouldn't be in this room. I shouldn't be talking to this one. You know, for example, I now have a PhD in clinical psychology. I didn't intend to have a PhD because I had the message that is for the elites and not for you, which was drummed into me by my white school teachers. And so in fact, when I went to grad school, I went there for something else. I went there for a marriage and family counseling because I didn't think I could do a PhD. And so the person at the school who I met for the first time said, "Oh, we have a new dean of psychology. Would you like to meet him?" And in fact, he's a Jamaican just like you. I said, "Oh, he's now the dean of the School of Psychology." I said, "Really?" And so he walked into his office, and Dr. Gooden said to me, "Oh, so you're here for the PhD program?" And that was the first time in my life that I had a message in my head that somebody is at least thinking about me as a candidate for a PhD program.
Wow.
And because of that, I changed my discipline to a PhD.
Wow, what an amazing story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like I've heard so many stories of people that have just even one person that believe in them or treat them in a way, like just completely humanize them. And that can be a completely life-changing event.
Yes. Yeah. And so, you know, you imagine if our Black youth were getting messages like that through their developmental years, I think you would see a different, you know, they wouldn't be as stigmatized as much as they are being doing for being constructed in the way they've been constructed by the environment.
Yeah. So Steve, you obviously spoke very much to the kind of sadness, hopelessness in a sense, and in our communications, it seems like you're not entirely in that same place, that you're maybe seeing some hope. I don't know if that is accurate. I'm just wondering, what is, Dorian, you had mentioned that you see this as changing the world. And I'm inclined to agree with you. But Steve, maybe we'll start with you. Do you see this as being different, as going to change things significantly? If so, why? If not, why not? And then we'll kind of hear what Dorian has to say on that too.
It's a two-headed answer. Yes and no. I'll start with the positive. Yes, in the sense that I have seen things that are different.
Okay.
And the first thing that I saw was different that gave me a sense of hope is when I watched the protesters on the TV. And I was able to recognize an actual multicultural protest.
Yes.
Most of the protests that I have seen on TV, like when it was Watts or when it was Baltimore, I can't remember the majority of the protesters were Black. But this time, the makeup of the protesters, it was a good scope of multicolored people. And there were so many white people. And so that gave me hope, because you see, one of the things that I have recognized that is perpetuating racism and white supremacy is white silence. And to see them come out and speak out, and also in my own private practices, listening to troubled young white individuals and being able to, be a mirroring or a nurturing for those emotional struggles that they're having with what they've seen, their upbringing, and the conflicts that they're having with their parents, tells me that something is changing in that sense. So yes, that is changing. I also see changes, people calling for reform or transformation or changes within the system itself, the oppressive system, specifically the police force. And so I see those changes. And I do believe that in some places and in some cases, we will get some change. And it will be a change in behavior. It will be a change in discrimination, because I look at discrimination as the actual behavior, and the prejudice and the racism as something that's deeper within. And so there might be things that would be put in place to change the behavior, the discriminatory behavior. And so that would be like a wall, to coin the phrase of a popular person, against discrimination, which will prevent or help, the death of Black men.
Yeah.
But no, in the sense of, I don't think we can change the mental construct of racism and white superiority. What we can do is maybe put a wall against the outworking of it so that it will impact Black people to a lesser degree, but I don't see that's changing because of other reasons why I think that racism and white supremacy exists.
Okay.
Which we can probably go into as we talk about it.
You're right, Steve, because most of those individuals, like the one where the young man who was killed jogging, that was a guy that's probably in his late 60s, early 70s, along with his son, in that particular area. So, in the South, those are strongholds that are going to be very, very difficult to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually something I kind of meant to bring up a little bit in the introduction. Steve and I are part of a group text thread, and some of the people have been kind of struggling with how to deal with acquaintances or other people that bring up, say, Candace Owens, or some of the other people that kind of talk about white privilege not existing and that kind of thing, because they haven't experienced it. And this isn't, what I'm going to say is not to deny their experience, but to say that a lot of other people have another experience. And if you live in, certain areas of the country, you're probably going to experience things quite differently. And even if you live in certain areas of a city, you would probably experience things quite differently. And so, in my mind, white privileges or whiteness is one of the privileges that exists. And so, it's something that we have to work to do away with, that there has to be equity and justice.
I'm very sorry. I'm just very suspicious of that position that you just espoused, Chad. To say people were brought up in different areas and they might not have had the experience. And I don't have a research for this. Somehow I'm suspecting that there's some degree of denial, because of how entrenched racism and white superiority is. I find it very hard to accept or entertain a Black person who has grown up in a white society and has not experienced any microaggression or anything. They must have the skin of an alligator not to be able to be, and they probably do, and not to be able to have that. And so these people who comes up with it, I just treat them as completely disingenuous. There are other motives that's driving their speech.
I think they have an economic motive where they can get a lot of people to listen to them by espousing their views.
Yes.
And that may be the case. I just was a little hesitant to say that, one of the ones that was mentioned in the thread today was a guy, who was saying, I've never experienced, discrimination. And so I think I agree with you, Steve and Peter. It's just, I didn't want to say, I don't know that I'm comfortable saying he has no legitimate experience. And it's all.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Is he black? Is he black?
He is Black. Mm-hmm.
So he's lying. What I can say about that. He can say that, and he may say, that I've never experienced it. But if that's the case, then his nose is so high up in the air that he's just kind of floats right over the top of it. And I don't care how light-skinned Black you are, or how dark-skinned Black you are, you're going to get racism, period.
Yeah.
And Steve is correct. I mean, I have to agree with 100% of it, just everything that he has said. The bottom line is, if you are Black and you're here in the United States, and pretty much anywhere in the world, to be honest with you, where it's a predominantly white society, you're going to come across racism. Somebody's going to either say and or do something that is racist because of just who you are. And with Steve, both him and I we've gone, as high as we can educationally.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think, because of that would say, okay, you have arrived, but it doesn't. because
Yeah.
then it goes to the other side of it. And I've been called an uppity nigger because of the fact that I do have an education.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you say about that? I mean, you just like, okay, well, I really haven't arrived. Maybe I thought I did, and I'm sure this has happened to Steve as well. Matter of fact,
I may have some insight to that, actually, just sitting here listening and thinking about that. Because as I was growing up, and remember, I'm saying that all my friends are white. My school was white. There's nobody available for me to relate to who was black. And I have to confess that at some point, I began to have disdain for the comprehensive school over there. I began to entertain messages that those people over there, the this and that, but Steve, you're not like that, you're different. I wanted that because look, I am in a place now whereby I'm alone. I need friends. I need to be accepted. And so with that need, I'm sucked into buying into some of their own messages, and I own them myself. Right? And at one time, one of my careers was as a computer programmer. It's called computer program at that time, stroke systems analyst. And I was getting jobs. And at one time I was entertaining, well, I'm getting a job. These guys over there is not getting a job because of they're lazy or they didn't want to do it. I'm going to be honest with you. I entertained some of those ideas because of the environment that I was in, because I wanted to be accepted, and then mind telling me I have to accept some of those messages and ideas in order to gain acceptance.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Dorian. So yeah, I can see that actually continuing, and at some point I was enlightened and I broke out of that. Actually, it took me in my mid-70s to go to the Middle East to actually break that. That pattern. Yeah. And so, I can understand someone growing up with that same structure, having those same kinds of beliefs, and just being in denial and continuing it into their adult years. I can see that happening. But I would never, ever say that racism did not exist. I've experienced it.
It's almost a protection mechanism for them to deny the existence of that so that they're then okay, is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's funny because I thought about what Steve had said. My father was a systems analyst for NASA.
Oh, wow.
And anytime and during the late 70s and the 80s here and especially in California, I mean, it was hard times as far as jobs are concerned. But my father always seemed to get a job because of the fact that he was a systems analyst. But when he was thinking, okay, because I'm so good at what I do, and I mean, he literally wrecked his marriage because of his wanting to be perfect, to be the best of the best. And when he would come home, he lived that life. He lived systems analyst, he breathed it, and he probably did something else with it, but who knows? But the bottom line is after he digested that, he ends up training new guys, the younger white guys that were coming in, and well, just train him, and then you're the best we have, and so we want him to know what's going on. So he would train 5 or 6 guys till he hit that glass ceiling, and he never did get promoted. And I mean, if I just be frank, it made him an alcoholic because of that. He's thinking he's going to get promoted because he is so good, and he was a very diligent person.
Yeah.
And you know, and to the detriment of sacrificing, you know, his marriage and his relationship with his kids. Still a good guy, but the bottom line is that and he never did get promoted and became an alcoholic and then eventually, you know, he was killed. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and that is something that I think is going to take, you know, as you were talking about, Steve, earlier, that it's going to, like, as far as not having hope, that it's going to take a long time for these attitudes to be rooted out. And there's been a lot of trauma, I think, in the Black community based on things exactly like that are going to take like that's generational trauma. You know, having a father who, you know, family splits and alcoholism, things like that. I think that those are things that are going to be dealt with for a long time because of those glass ceilings that you're describing. You know, I'm not going to get promoted behind this, and finally realizing that. And I think that's an important part of it to understand for us right now, is there's so much anger and helplessness that, you know, you were describing earlier. I don't think that's something that a lot of white people understand, having that rage and that helplessness. I don't think a lot of us understand that. And I think that's something that is important to really put a voice to.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have another discussion kind of on to help, you know, understand more aspects of what you were describing, Dorian, with glass ceilings, the accumulation of wealth differences, and those kinds of things that have been significantly different between white and Black communities, you know, over time. So I did want to hear from you, Dorian. You know, you said you feel like this is going to change the world. You know, what do you think is different about this? And you have a background where you've been on the police force, and you've probably seen police behave badly, and yet you've been in a part of that police community. So yeah, what are your perspectives on those things?
Well, you know, when you are a minority, especially Black, and you're on a predominantly, because, you know, Inglewood, even though it's the community is predominantly Black, Hispanic, and Pacific Islander, the police department pretty much is not. It's predominantly white. Okay. And when you look at the upper echelon, predominantly white. So captains, lieutenants, and the whatnot. I mean, you know, we had one lieutenant, one or two sergeants, but, you know, they're referred to as token. Hey, we brought these guys up, you know, and right. The bottom line is that until you get equality across the top tier, you know, things are not going to change too much down at the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so basically the officers that I worked with, and I have to admit, we had some good guys that were white, that were on the department, but they were detectives, and maybe a couple that were, you know, sergeants. And they didn't tolerate what we saw happen to George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And they would basically handle it, you know, with discipline, and sometimes even get the guys fired who were acting up. But for the most part, there was this thing is, if you don't bleed blue, then you're not really a cop. And my attitude was, you know, do you know what COP stands for? Anyone?
No.
Community-oriented policing. Huh. That's what it's about. And if that's what we're doing, is community community-oriented policing, then we're not going to abuse the people that we're serving.
Mm-hmm.
That's my attitude. So I pretty much had an attitude just like we're doing right now, just talking and and breaking bread and whatnot. But when you're out there and you show any type of compassion, if you arrest somebody that may have given you some grief out there, there's an unwritten rule that person's going to get the beat down. We go to the hospital first, then we go to the jail. That's how it is.
Wow.
I just want to
go ahead, Steve.
just make a couple of comments on your comments. I heard Peter was talking about that it's going to take generations. And so I'm suspecting that it's going to take generations to do what? And I'm guessing he means to sweep out or clean out racism.
Yeah.
Before, and on the other hand, I hear Dorian says, well, if there could be some black people at the top or something like that. I don't care who's at the top. You can be as white as snow. It doesn't matter to me. Okay, whether you're black or you're white. What matters to me is how you treat me.
Yeah.
And how you're treating me is steeped in racist, prejudice, discriminatory processes that's within you, which Peter hopes is, after generation, is going to somehow work itself out. I am not as optimistic because I don't think that the society as it's put together at this moment in its multicultural setting lends itself for that. In fact, it lends itself to what we're actually seeing today, which is white superiority and racism and killing black people.
Yeah, what I was referring to is I hope that it isn't generational for our police force to be forced to change. I think it is going to be generations before there aren't widely held beliefs in places like the South, like we're talking about with Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot by a man and his son. That son was taught that by his dad. And there's a lot more of that being passed down. I think that's going to take generations to stop. I don't think that's going to go away overnight. And I think there are rather big shifts in the majority of society that are happening, and it's by no means perfect, but I think that society is slowly moving in the right direction, but it's going to be generations before we have people, not having white supremacy passed down within families. I think that's going to take a long time.
When I said top tier, all I'm saying is, Steve and everyone else, is that when you have an individual who, for instance, like Steve or myself, who have had, the experiences that we had, to where, and I can use a guy by the name of Chief Parks. He didn't tolerate what was going on there at LAPD. So when he got in, he was ruthless. A lot of people don't know that, and I know it because somebody that I'm married to basically was with the city attorney's office and answered directly to him. And I don't know if you remember the 10,000 cases where they had planted stuff on people. Yeah. But those individuals were able to get away with that for a long time. Police, for the most part, are able to get away with a lot of stuff that they've been doing because it's in the culture of policing. Mm-hmm. Okay, and what I'm saying is that there are individuals, and there's not enough of them, and there are not enough of them on the police department. You may have one or two individuals that just like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to have it. Well, if you're a chief, you have the ability to change that. At least for the time that you're there, and and you'll deal with it harshly. So people will be on, tippy-toeing around and trying to figure out, well, how can I get away with being a racist or a jerk and still be within the limits of the law because of the broadness.
The
That brings a
expectation.
question I actually want to ask both of you, because I think there's both police experience and psychology on this. I recently read a book by the lead FBI negotiator that was at Waco. And it was fascinating to read. And he said the scariest part about being in law enforcement and the trends that he was seeing was the militarization of police. And he obviously was a negotiator, and he's saying, like, the number one option should always be negotiation. But a lot of our forces have gone away from that, and it's towards militarization. And so that doesn't deal directly with issues of racism within the police, but is that something that you really saw and experienced? And then can you talk maybe about the psychology, as both of you guys are psychologists, can you talk about the psychology of how that then turns into racial issues?
Well, policing for the most part has been a militaristic organization. I mean, that's what its foundations are from. So I can't see them ever getting away from it in that standpoint, because if they're going to deal with skirmishes, with that's how they, and a lot of the terminology is military. Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be any swift change. When I say there's a change, and it is generational. The young kids now that are coming up, they have Black friends, they've got Hispanic friends, and it doesn't matter because everyone's just sort of together. If there's going to be any change, that's where it's going to have to come from. Because whatever's going on now, and especially in the group that we're in, there's not going to be any real super change. It's just going to be individuals sort of being a little bit more covert in what they do. Let me put it that way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I'm a little bit, I understand Steve's skepticism. I'm a little bit more hopeful than he is long-term because of what you just described, Dorian, where especially in our area of the country, where kids are exposed to, their peers of all races and
it's a melting pot.
Ways. And that's a very different, that's very different than it probably was 30 years ago, or even, longer back.
Brown versus the Board of Education was in our parents' lifetime. Like, it's definitely different than it was. I mean, there have been massive societal changes that, well and perfect, I think we've seen some big changes in the last 50, 60 years, and there's still a long way to go.
But it's a long way to go, and it's a
long way to go.
Very, very slow.
Yeah.
And I to be honest with you, I think a lot of what's driven in terms of racism is economics.
Yeah.
If there's a threat that it looks like, somebody's going to get ahead of someone, I'm not going to say who, but it's like, no, we can't have that. We've got to figure out a way to do this or do that to put them back in their place.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw a statistic that Black women make 60 cents on the dollar compared to white male counterparts in the exact same position. And I agree. I think a lot of these issues are economic and have to be solved with economic, whether it's policy or societal pressure. Those are going to be really, really crucial points to this changing.
Mm-hmm. So, Dorian, I wanted to go back to, you mentioned the kind of where the community policing came from, and go back to this idea of militarization, because those seem somewhat in conflict. I mean, I agree. I can understand that police, have for a long time been somewhat militaristic, but it seems like the idea of community policing is a little bit in conflict with the militarization of police. And so have you seen a shift in policing in the way that you experienced it when you were on the force? You had a long career in the police department and served in multiple different cities. So I guess, did you see any changes over that career period in the way that the use of force kind of occurred over that time? And then also, did you see differences between cities or departments?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because the city I worked for, when I got hired on as a police officer, as Gardena, well, the population is predominantly Asian. So there's no tolerance for foolishness in the police department. And, you know, the chief was very, when he first hired me, and this is a white guy, very progressive. He said, you know, Dorian, he says, I have a lot of cowboys. I think I was the third black to be hired and only the second one to survive there, because everyone else that was there ended up either quitting or moving on to another department because they could not deal with the officers that they were working with. Mm-hmm. And I told him, he basically said, if you run into any racism or anything with some of these guys around here, he says, you can handle it your way or you can come tell me. I said, I'll handle it my way. He said, oh, that's good. That's what I want. So I got pushed back when I first got on, you know, and probation is a year. And a lot of things can happen to you in that year. But I was able to stick it out, and the individuals realized, hey, this guy he can handle himself, he's a cop, but I didn't have to use violence, you know. And when I've seen these guys, you know, pull a guy out of a window that may be open that wide, and a full-grown man, and just stomp him like he stole something. Wow. And it was scary to see that, because I'm thinking, you're going to kill somebody. The good thing is that I had training officers, at least 2 of them, that were assigned to me by the chief, and they would always say, watch what's going to happen. So that's what I was trying to explain to Steve before, when I saw the look on that guy's face when he killed George Floyd, is when I'm sitting there or standing there, whatever it is, watching these officers do what they do, and I mean, it was across the board. It didn't matter which agency it was. If they all ended up in the same place at one time, the culture, the actions, everything was going to be always the same. Somebody's going to get beat up. Somebody's going to the hospital. And sometimes, you know, they call it boot therapy. And you know what I mean by that. And it was just horrible to watch that. But see, and Steve is correct. The attitude that I have is not the attitude that's in the culture of policing. Mm-hmm. That's the difference.
I just want to jump in here, a couple of observations, because we're trying to talk about, you know, what changes has happened in the police force over time, and are things getting better? There may have been some changes, but the question is whether the changes that have occurred are actually effective. In other words, are they benefiting the minority groups? If you look at minority groups, they lack healthcare, health problems, no jobs, lack of opportunities, high incarceration rates, and then some of them is going to have to sell drugs so that mama and the baby can eat, because there's no opportunity. Those things are not getting any better. But what you've seen got better as far as the police is concerned. They're more highly militarized than they were ever before. They are carrying now weapons that soldiers carries in a war arena, right? Why is that? You know, who is supporting the militarization of the police? I will say it is coming out of a bunch of people who feels insecure. And so in order to make me feel safe, I am going to harm them to the T. Who am I frightened of? Oh, I'm frightened of those bunch of peoples there who don't have any jobs, who doesn't have any money, who doesn't have any opportunities, and who is just trying to make ends meet. And so I'm going to militarize my police to be secure just in case. And so they are militarizing the police to become this mediating force in what an environment that they feel threatened by.
Right. So, and what I was curious,
and the older you are, the more threatened you feel.
Right. Yeah. And how has, you know, and maybe this hasn't changed, but has the mindset shifted? You know, has the mindset shifted away from community policing, like you were describing? You know, the way you approached it, Dorian, overall to you know, a mindset where, yeah, I feel threatened at all times. And that's the way I go into my job at all times.
I wanted to add one little tidbit to what Steve said really quickly. They're actually using weapons that the military is not allowed to use. Tear gas was banned by the Geneva Convention in 1925, and yet our police force is still allowed to use it on protesters.
Exactly. And this is because of an underlying insecurity.
Yeah.
And that's why they've militarized them.
I was in the service, and I can tell you, I was in the Army, and they still use tear gas when you go through training. So I don't know.
That's funny that they're banned on using it on the enemy, but they'll use it on their own guys.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the police force, because they know that they're getting all the money, all the funding to provide this security, with their authoritarian personality, they assume this license then to kill innocent people. And because they have been allowed to have their own subjective reason for killing.
Well, so yeah, that's an interesting statement, Steve. That may be a good transition to kind of the next topic. I want to explore a little bit, and we might push back against necessarily like a license, but what are the things that could predispose somebody to as a police officer specifically, to doing some type of violence, or possibly, you know, worst case scenario, killing somebody? And one of the things in my mind might be that they've gotten away with it before and nobody has ever, you know, disciplined them for it. So I guess I'm curious from your perspective, Dorian, on that, you know, what kinds of things did you see predispose people to violent acts?
In general or against minorities?
Well, in my case, it would have to be, especially in the last couple of departments that I worked with, would have to be against minorities.
Mm-hmm.
So is that what you're referring to, Steve?
No, I'm just trying to clarify Chad's question, whether or not
Oh,
police killing in general. Yeah.
Trust me.
Or do you mean, as we open, in killing blacks more than the other groups?
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you mean, Chad?
Well, I think I meant kind of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I understand where he's coming from, because I think we can all agree that black men are much more likely to be killed by police officers than white men, and yet there are instances of white men being violently killed. As I told you, I just read a book on Waco, and that was extreme use of force against a group of mostly white people. So I think actually both things are there in your discussion, Dorian, as you're answering this. Like, there are people that will probably be violent against almost anyone, and then also there are more people that seem that they're willing to be violent against minorities.
Correct.
So is that a fair summary of what you were getting at, Chad?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that stems from fear, how these individuals grew up. Just like what Steve was talking about when he was going to school and being the only, black kid in the school. That's pretty hard.
Yeah.
So you figure if they've never been around a black individual and they already have these predisposed prejudices due to lack of understanding, you're going to get that kind of pushback when they're on the police department. So now anything that they perceive as being something not characteristic to what you're supposed to be or what they have thought you to be in terms of their own racism or prejudices, then they're going to put you in line if you end up resisting any kind. But see, I think a lot of times these individuals want to do that. That's why they become police officers in the first place. I'm going to make sure that I take care of this. And then you get a lot of individuals also from the military that become police officers. So that mentality of the militarization of police officers is going to be carried over from being in the military. And if that's who the individuals that you're working with, then you're like a big gang wearing, blue or khaki and green, whatever.
Right.
Did you notice like hiring practices built around hiring people that were aggressive by nature, or was it more just those people that were drawn towards it, or where would you see as the dynamic there?
Interesting question, because I've seen individuals that would come onto the department and they were like, wearing a halo. But the minute they got off of training and they were out in the car by themselves or with some other young dude, then that's when the real person would come out.
Dorian, I'm also wondering, in your experience, like you will get somebody who comes into the police force with high ideals, wanting to make a difference, but 2 or 3 years down the line, he's being contaminated by the culture itself, and then is really acting not like a cop, but like a militarized attitude. I wonder if you've seen that as well.
Yes.
Because there's something to say for the socializing process of the police culture.
Yeah, the socialization process, yeah.
Yeah. And that goes across the board, though, Steve, in terms of it's not going to be just limited to the people that are predominant race, because I've seen individuals when I worked, at departments where they were predominantly Black or Hispanic, the same thing. But when I say predominant, what I'm saying is there's a lot more on that department than, and there had to be, because as the population changed, because Inglewood used to be predominantly white, and they had the 6 o'clock rule. You know what that is?
No,
If you're out past, let me put it this way: they'll tell you if the sun goes down and you're still here in the city limits, you're going to jail. Period.
Is that for anyone or just people of color?
People of color.
Oh, wow.
So, that sounds like something that's down south in the lower Texas or Mississippi or something.
So Dorian, this is like a nature nurture question. And I'm trying to get a sense of this. What has more of an effect on a police personality? Is it the socializing effect of the police culture, or do they come into the situation predisposed to and having this attitude, this authoritarian attitude? Because inevitably, it's played out across all groups of people, including.
Well, and I want to add one element to that, Steve, because I agree with you. That's a really interesting question. I would add one dimension to it, which is training. So I would see that different from the culture that they absorb in the day-to-day, experience. And so, yeah, how much would, might this be from their personality that they have preceding, how much it might be due to training that they receive and cultivates a specific mindset as warrior versus guardian, and then how much would be just the culture they pick up.
Wow, that's an excellent question, Steve, as usual.
He's a psychologist for a reason.
Yeah.
He's got a PhD for a reason.
Well, it wasn't for that. I'm just curious because I don't know.
Yeah, he's hit on something because a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are individuals that will come into policing with these high ideals that, hey, I'm gonna be a good officer. I'm gonna go out and I'm not gonna end up doing what we have seen, or historically, and eventually, a lot of them do change because they don't see the minority individual that's living out there. It's hard for them to process that these people, first of all, that they may be getting in a low paid job, they're in low income housing, whatever. And they're a minority. So they're gonna do things to supplement income. Just like what Steve was saying, sometimes you get some individuals sell drugs, others are out there, robbing and pillaging or committing burglaries to make ends meet. And some, that's just their full-time job.
And so the cycle continues. That then justifies another group having a sense of superiority over them.
Yes, absolutely.
And we need a militarized police force to do that.
Yes.
But Dorian, on the point of the police or this rookie coming into the police force, and I've seen many movies like this, that's why it came in my mind, and the latest being Les Miserables. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's in French.
Yeah.
It was in this French, and you see this rookie police comes into this setting whereby the culture was so imposing. Eventually, he submits gradually to the dominance of the culture, and I see, and that also parallels my own experience, because I started to submit to the environment that I was trying to identify with at the time, because I needed friends, I needed an identity, I needed colleagues, and then I'm starting to adopt the thinking and attitude as they do, even against my own kind. You see, and I'm guessing it's, what would you say, Dorian? Do you think it's more of the nurture of the police culture, or is it the nature of the police who comes into the police culture?
That's a good question. And because, see, and I don't know if it's because of my age and or how I grew up, but for the most part, I never brought myself down to the level of acceptance. And when I say that, I don't mean acceptance in terms of of other individuals. I mean acceptance of some of the stuff that I had seen, and I refused to take part in it. And a lot of it had to do with a training officer, Jim Mahone from the LA County Sheriffs. That guy, I mean, he was very smart in how he trained. Eventually, they got him out of there because he was going against the grain. He was a black guy, and he basically said, once you have a guy in custody and you've got the handcuffs on him, there's no need for any other extracurricular activity. It's done. You've got him. Take him to jail. don't take them to the hospital because you got yourself upset or you allowed some of these other guys to beat him up. And I refused to have that. I was not very popular in any of the departments I was at because I wouldn't do that. If a guy resisted and he's trying to hurt me, then, you know, I'm going to use the force that I need to do to subdue him. Then after that, you know, I'm not going to take him out for drinks, but I'm definitely going to take him, you know, get him to jail in one piece. Because I can tell you there's many a time where the dog, because I like working graveyard shift. That's when, you know, stuff's happening. The dog handlers would come out, and the policy is that if the dog comes out, the dog gets a bite. And those dogs are vicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of those guys train their dogs to go for the crotch.
Oh man.
And so I know that Steve understands when I say that, because yeah, that's your manhood basically. And they didn't care. That's what they wanted the dog to do.
Wow.
And there's been many a time when the dog, I've got the guy in handcuffs and I'm walking him back to the car, and they go, well, let the dog, you know, get a bite. I said, no, unless you're going to take this guy and you're going to take the paper. Oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. I said, well, the dog is not getting a bite then. That's not going to happen.
Wow.
What?
One guy let the dog lurch out, and I just turned my body and checked the dog's face, you know, his head with my shoulder. But if I had let him go, I mean, that dog would have tore that guy up. And I mean, what is that? I don't get it. And because I was not, and first thing they said, well, what's wrong? And I hate to use this word, but it's what the guy said, the dog handler. What's wrong with that nigga? How come he didn't let the dog get a bite?
Wow.
I just ignored it, put the guy in the car, took him to the station.
Right, and this factor is
the guy who had the dog was from another department that was adjacent, because we had such low manpower that they both we would back each other.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to say that this factor has actually played a role in the death of George Floyd.
Yeah.
Because there are other police there, and as Dorian characterized him as the alpha dog, right? They were constrained by the culture. They could have said something, they could have nudged him and says, knock it off, but they were constrained by the culture, which played a role in the death of George Floyd.
Yeah.
Right.
I wanted to ask you about that culture and your experience with it, Dorian, because it sounds like you didn't really give into that. And it sounds like you were at 3 different police localities, and 2 of them for a rather long time. And so did you experience a glass ceiling based on, I think there's 2 factors to this, based on both your race and your inability, your unwillingness to buy into that system where the dog gets a bite, or I'm going to send this guy to the hospital first? Was that something that you really experienced in your longer stints at those?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew that when I was here in Riverside, I wasn't going to get promoted. In fact, they wanted to send me out on patrol, you know, and I was just maybe a nudge from being retired. I'm like, I'm not going out there like that. And because I knew that I knew I was too close to retirement. So I'm like, this is not happening. But when I was at Gardena, like I said, the chief was a very fair individual. And I ended up leaving to go to Penn State as a student, and he goes, you know, you always will have a job here if you decide to come back. And he said, I just wanted to let you know I was going to promote you in the next 6 months, you know, to sergeant. And I was like, oof. But I had, my family was going there, so I had to leave, but he understood. When I got back here, I went to to him first. And I asked, I said, you know, do you have any? He goes, didn't matter. He says, I'm going to hire you anyway. So he understood the mentality that I had, because that's what he was looking for in officers. You know, and the thing is that the law, there's the letter of the law, and then there's the spirit of the law. And how you execute that is how you're going to be in terms of as a person. Yeah. The letter of the law means doesn't matter what happens, you're going to jail because of X, Y, or Z. The letter of the law and the state tells me I have the discretion to do whatever I'm going to do. And if it's not that serious, like a guy who's boosting food because he's got a family to feed, you know, I'll go pay for it. And I've done that. I'll pay for the man, and they'll come back over here because next time I'm going to take you to jail. I can't afford this. So yeah, that was what he liked about me. Yeah. Not all officers are bad guys, and not all white officers are bad guys, because, I mean, like I said, the chief was white. A couple of individuals at Inglewood, and you would think, man, that's really, because there was over 75 gangs in a small 9-mile square area.
Whoa.
And I mean, you couldn't, if you crossed the street in one territory right there, you could be dead.
Wow.
So when I was very busy but we had some detectives they were good, but see, now they weren't uniformed officers though. They were detectives. And they had their attitude was, I'm here to investigate who killed so-and-so. And I've seen them work diligently and hard at their job. I mean, where they would actually come money out of their pocket to take a witness or a victim and sequester them somewhere so that they wouldn't be exposed to any of the gang, because it was mainly gang activity. It was gang homicides that we were dealing with.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like it varies significantly based on the chief and what kind of expectations they set. If I hear you right, Dorian.
As long as the chief has enough huevos to say, you know what, I'm not going to tolerate any of this foolishness, because whenever these things happen, what happens? If somebody, like, for instance, what's going to happen in Minneapolis, they're going to get sued.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you've got council members that are like, you're taking money, because they have a slush fund for the big departments, trust me. And I mean, it's rather healthy. But the smaller departments, they don't have that kind of money. So they would prefer, we may need cars, equipment, or we want to hire other people. So they're going to be quick to pull the trigger on, you know what, you're going to get suspended for X amount of days.
Interesting.
Go home, think about it.
Interesting.
And that's how they are able to control that on the smaller departments. Unless, again, it goes back to the chief and his respect. If they know, okay, hey, I've seen this guy fire about 6 of my comrades, then I'm going to kind of tippy-toe around all this. And then if you have lieutenants and sergeants that enforce that mentality, then you're going to have a fairly decent department.
Yeah.
Medina, I can't recall the time that while I was there that they had been sued.
Wow. So how do the police unions or police federations factor into
brother? Power.
Power.
Okay. Yes.
So how? But specific. I mean, obviously that is a type of collective power. But how does it specifically impact the discipline for officers that do things that might go against the law, or might be might violate the spirit of the law, if not the letter of the law?
I would also just to tack on the end. How does that influence other police officers' willingness to come forward and say, "Hey, this other guy's acting outside the law"?
That's a good addition.
I'll address Chad's question first, and then I'll come to you, Peter.
Okay.
Police unions have major juice, especially on the big departments. So they can throw money, like for instance, and I gave Steve probably 3 or 4 pages of police abuses on YouTube. New York, for instance, notorious for killing people. It's like shoot first, then we'll ask questions. Well, there's no one to answer the question, so it must be a righteous shot, shooting. And basically, and that doesn't mean that they don't have good officers, because I use them in my sample. They've got excellent officers there. However, they do have some bad apples. Because it's almost now around a 45,000 man police department, it's hard to really kind of sort through that.
Right.
That's massive.
They have a lot of money as far as their unions, but that's what New York is known for, is unions. Jimmy Hoffa and the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of that is that when it comes down to policing, and let's say, for instance, they're indicted and they do go, most of the population, a large amount of them, just cannot envision the fact that the police could do this, could act out in a certain way, and they're going to pick the right jury. The union's going to say, well, you know what, you're going to make sure whoever, I'm not going to say whom, but somebody that may be sitting on the bench possibly, if you want, those are elected officials. So when your time comes around, if you don't want so-and-so to run against you because we're going to back that person, you're pretty much going to make sure that this is going to happen. It's an unwritten rule. They already know that.
Yeah.
So unions are very strong, very powerful.
Yeah.
Because look what happened to Jackie Lacey. You know who I'm talking about?
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
She's a black woman who's the district attorney for Los Angeles. And there was during the election they were protesting her, but mainly minorities were protesting at her house.
Wow.
And this is all on tape, so I'm not saying fabricating anything. The husband comes out with a gun. Get off my porch. Well, we just want to talk to you. No, get off my porch. So the police show up. Of course, this guy goes back in the house. He comes back out, and then the police get all the protesters off of her front yard and out of her lawn. Well, she gets reelected. Because most of her decision to do certain things, I'm not saying that she does or doesn't, this is based on record, on the facts, that slow to bring cops to prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
So then they give her union money in order to support her campaign.
She gets supported because of that. So in LAPD is the largest, and then the sheriffs, they're the second largest group of law enforcement in that area. Well, and they've got strong unions.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of questions as far as what to do going forward. And Minneapolis it seems like choosing a really interesting option that I think I'd like to ask you about, Dorian, which is to disband the police department and form a different type of community safety organization. What's kind of your thought process on that? I don't know if you've had a chance to read about it or
No, I heard about it. The funny thing is, when I was at Inglewood, Small World, but I did academic recruiting at Penn State. That was part of my job. And I recruited this young lady there from Minneapolis. And it just so happens when I was at Englewood, the chief said, I need you to go to the airport and pick up a couple that's going to be speaking at this Black organization of police officers. So I said, okay. Happens to be the girl that I recruited. It's her mother, and she was the commissioner.
Wow.
City of Minneapolis. I mean,
Oh, wow.
and we're talking about a 10 or 15 year difference in terms of meeting the daughter and then meeting, her mother and father. It's unbelievable. But bottom line is that she, and I asked her when we were coming back from the airport and taking her to the department, I said, have you guys had any problems there? She said, the reason why I'm a commissioner, because she was civilian, is because we have a lot of problems. And this was back in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
She said it's been that way for a long time. So yeah, there is an issue in terms of policing in terms of, I think disbanding is not going to happen. I don't see that. But what I do see them doing is now, because that guy Chad, Chauvin, I need to use the guy's last name because I don't want anybody to think it's Chad. Our Chad. But he had several complaints against him.
19.
A lot.
19 complaints.
If it was 16 or 19 or whatever it was. That's too many for him to still be there.
Right.
I think, you take case by case, but then again, that's a top-down thing.
Mm-hmm.
The chief should have said, you know what, this is the second time I've seen you here, depending on however the severity of what it was the first time he was called in on the mat for.
Yeah.
But the bottom line was, hey, look, you're here now. This is the second time, you're out.
Yeah.
Typically what they do is they'll put the person on administrative leave with pay.
Yeah.
That
was kind of why I asked the question about the unions and the federations. I've been reading about the current chief of police is actually, it was an article by one of the city commissioners that was written in Times. And they said that actually they have a good working relationship with the chief of police. That person's challenge has been is they've fired several officers that then when they go through the arbitration process with the union or the federation, those officers are reinstated. And so the chief of police has had a very, very difficult time creating any kind of change. And that was one of the reasons, I guess they'd had a shooting in 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019, and now this one. And that was why this commissioner said, we have to vote to disband.
I'd like to ask a question, and I think we're probably getting towards the end of everybody's time for this, but I'd like to start with Steve and then go to Dorian and Chad on this. And one of the things I've read about a little bit, and these are extremely limited case studies, so there's there's very little ability to say this is solid data. But I've read about a couple police departments, one of which that was having similar issues to what you just described, Chad. And they fired the people at the top and replaced them with people at the top that were really good. And they found they still had issues because there was still that culture that Steve, you've mentioned a lot, this culture of violence towards minorities. And so that was really hard for someone just at the top to break. And there was one police department, and I'm forgetting, I want to say Camden, but that seems like a rather large city for them to do this in. They got rid of everyone. And they said, we're bringing in people that are going to be exactly what you described as cops. We're community protectors.
Yeah.
And they found that it completely changed the relations between the police and the citizens of that city. And so my question is, what do you see? And Steve, again, I want to start with you, and we'll kind of go around the circle, at least in the way it is in my view of Zoom right now. What do you see as the changes that could be made to change our police force and the way they interact with both people of color and within the militarization of the police system to actually have a positive impact? That was a little bit of a confusing statement. Let me restate it.
I think I
let's
get
leave
the question.
I know what you're saying, though. I'll wait for Steve to finish, though.
Okay, yeah, Steve, I'd like to hear your answer first.
Yeah, there are some changes that can be made, but you can't tinker with it. The tinkering approach will last for a week or two, and then the culture of the system will just
wins out.
Rebound.
Like a rubber band, it'll come right back.
It'll just be a rubber band again.
Yeah.
And so you have to really cut it at the neck and try to develop a new system, a different system. Even though you may have people who are racist or white supremacists in that system, I don't mind. Trust me, I don't mind. But the system is now transformed that would keep those things in check so that they will not spill out and kill the community. So I am supporting the idea of defund the police. It's scary to other groups because they're thinking, you know, this means, oh, I'm so totally insecure. They're going to take away the squad car. They're going to take away the guns, and then they're coming to get us with a paranoid idea. But defunding the police, because the police have been playing more roles than they can manage. I'm working in forensic. I know a lot of the cases that I get into the hospitals because a policemen have decided. They're on the street and they're in the situation and they've made a decision about this person because they've been given the role to play mental health experts, and they come to certain decisions that is bad for people, bad for their lives. And they're basically out of their league. If there's a problem in a school, the police is called to go and take a 10-year-old out in handcuffs, you know? And so, some of this has to be changed. And that's why they get so much funding, is because, you know, they have to do all of these things. They have to have all of these training, but you can't, it's very difficult to train a police personality to be a mental health, empathic social worker or supervisor. They can't do that. And they don't do it very well, but they're getting the funding to do it. And so, yes, cut it off at the neck and rebuild the system. That system would be misplaced if it's aimed at classes and education about how you shouldn't be a racist. And I know they're talking about, teach them about cultural competence and all of that. That may be good, but I don't want it dependent upon that. I want the system to be dependent upon there are rules and regulations that must be applied that are for the safety of the community. And if you go against those rules, there are consequences. Build those in. You can be a racist if you want to be a racist. That's fine, right? But what's not fine is for me to be the victim of your feelings or your beliefs.
So I just want to say back to you what I'm hearing to make sure I completely understand. And I think I really like what you're saying, is saying like the system needs to police itself. So the system should be rebuilt in a way where people are allowed to have their personal beliefs that are probably despicable to all of us, but the system is going to keep them from taking those out on somebody that looks differently from them or thinks differently from them. Is that encapsulating what you're getting at?
I think you said it better than I did.
Well, I had a good teacher that said it right before me. So cool. Thank you. I like that answer. How about you, Dorian?
Yeah, I agree with Steve. The only thing is the execution of that that undertaking. I think that would be very difficult because there has to be a buy-in. And if you get a buy-in, and when I say that, I mean city council, the mayor, individuals that are, that's constituents are bringing in the money that pays these individuals, then it may work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be, if you don't have buy-in, then it's just going to be spinning like a hamster on a wheel.
Right. Yeah, I think that, Minnesota, if they do go through with the idea of disbanding their police department and they create something else, that's going to have a ripple effect on other departments that are going to say, it seems like to me, they're going to say, hey, we got to now figure out how to regulate ourselves. Otherwise, this may happen to us. One of the ideas, I'm speaking from a medical perspective, one of the ideas of being a professional is the ability to self-regulate. You have, for instance, with doctors, you have doctors making decisions about what a good doctor is, and regulating at a societal level. And I think, if I understand correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dorian, is that police have that ability for self-regulation as well, to
Absolutely.
a certain degree.
And
and from my perspective as a physician, that can be removed if we fail to self-regulate appropriately. And I think if Minnesota opts to, or Minneapolis opts to disband their police department, that's going to send a huge message that, hey, we failed to self-regulate. We had multiple opportunities to do so. And that's going to have a ripple effect, hopefully aiming towards what Steve's describing of really, really changing the way that the police department interacts with their communities. Sorry, I interrupted your thoughts, Dorian. So I want to give you more space to answer.
That was well put. Self-regulating, and that's the thing is again, it has to come from within the organization, where there's individuals who have the wherewithal to challenge those individuals that are within the department that say, you know what, you can't work here any longer.
Right.
We're not looking for what it is that you have. You can go maybe work somewhere else, but this isn't the place for you.
Yeah, and that needs to happen much more quickly than it is now, because right now it's happening at the murder stage. Chauvin murdered that guy.
Yes, he did.
That should have happened in his previous 18, 19 offenses.
You're right.
Yeah. Right.
And they should have stopped it then in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, and Peter, that's a very good question, because what I am suggesting there is a practical, workable way that will prevent the death or the abuse of the community. Yeah. But I hear people talking about, a high-flying approach to this, which I think is not workable, and that is truth and reconciliation. Everybody, the whole of America must face the truth, face the pain of the past, recognize what they've done, be educated, and then they will say, oh, wow. That was workable in South Africa because the majority were Black.
Yeah.
I don't think it's workable here. And that is why I don't subscribe to that route, because how can you tell a man that you need to, revise your religion? You need to revise your Christianity. You need to reconstruct your gospel. You need to rewrite your history. You need to re-educated, and all the things that you will believe and honest and good about you were not so. And then have an awakening and then treat other people as equal as yourselves.
Yeah.
Please.
I mean, I see what you're saying about the enormous sea change that takes for an individual. I recognize at the same time that we both hope for that, right? Like we both hope for a critique within evangelical Christianity that says this is wrong and we should be speaking out about it. And we should have been speaking out about it for, 250, 200 years. But yeah.
And I want to say what I love about this, what Steve presented there, is that I think truth and reconciliation I believe in that, but it's got to start on these small levels with 4 or 5 small, community people talking, and then that's going to spread. But that's going to take a lot of time. But what you said earlier, when we were talking about the scenario, was about there's space for people to have beliefs that are despicable to me. But the overall systemic change and the rules we're going to have in place for this don't allow those to act out in hurtful ways on a large scale.
Yeah.
Because I think freedom of thought is one of the most important freedoms in America. Being American is where I see it come out. Those are really important things. And I think somebody should have the right to be a white supremacist, a legal right. I don't think the society should go, we accept that and you welcome in and do what you want. But I do believe you should have a right to think that. And so I think to me, just to give my answer to my own question, is it's a combination of the changes that you put forth, which I really appreciate those. And then on an individual level, starting that truth and reconciliation. I think it's going to take, like I said earlier, it's going to be multi-generational in that how long that change takes. Mm-hmm. But I think if we can start it here, we can start in smaller communities and grow that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So,
I'll pray for you.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to echo what Steve said earlier. My concern are my kids and my grandkids.
Yeah.
Because I would hate for them to be subjected to what I've been subjected to, or what I know Steve, has echoed. And think about, our parents, grandparents, and they've got some real stories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of my sons is a nurse. Another one has a doctorate from Harvard in education, and I have a daughter who's at Stanford, and she's a cardiothoracic surgeon and a professor. The last thing I want is for them to have to go through this because someone's mentality says, you know what, I see you as a Black person. Mm-hmm. Not a productive member of society, but you're Black. So that means you must be doing something. Or right. Even if you're not, I'm going to make contact with you anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what I see the role of white America. I think it's our job now to stand when those things are falling down, when they're experiencing things that, your kids, both of you reference your kids, when they're experiencing things that should not be a part of our systemic society, I think it's our role to stand up and stand in front of them. And that's where I think truth and reconciliation can be an important part of the societal change. And yeah, I think that is the necessary change that we have to see, is so that somebody then that didn't grow up, you talked earlier about people that now they're growing up in a melting pot. They have Black friends, they have Hispanic friends, but people that didn't, that still have these old ways of thinking, they're going, am I willing, I'll say this to a Black guy, am I going to say that to the white guy standing in front of him? That's then much harder on them. And I think that can create those systems of change where it's people going, I'm going to stand in front of you because you are my friend that I grew up with.
Right. Exactly.
But in the meantime, build that wall.
Build those barriers for bad action.
For protection.
Yeah.
I love the positive slant you put on build the wall. I can go get that now.
So one thing that that people should be aware of that is out there is that in 2015, Obama put together a task force to look at this specific issue. I believe it was after Ferguson. And they came up with a 116-page document that has some very, very practical ways to transform police departments. And so I'd encourage, anybody listening to consider taking a look at that, just so you're aware that is out there. One of the things that I didn't reference in that context, but the shift away from a warrior mentality towards a guardian mentality was one of the things that was in that document. And there was a lot of police involvement in the construction of that document. So anyways, there are, I think that it can feel like this topic is overwhelming and what could we possibly do, but there are, things that have already been suggested and I think, really need to be taken into implementation. One of the things that I wanted to introduce, Peter, you're asking the question of what do we do? And I recognize this is fairly, early in its thought process, in my view, in my personal view of how this would work. But in medicine, one of the things that we've shifted away from with medical error is that when an error occurs, we previously blamed the individual that committed the error. And that's really shifted over the last 15 to 20 years, where we've started to recognize that there's a lot of different factors that end up influencing an outcome when a medical error has occurred. And so there's key drivers, and we kind of bucket these into different categories, and you try to actually find as many different things that could have influenced the likelihood of a mistake making it to a patient. And so those are bucketed into things like processes. So it could be the order issue, you're ordering in the electronic health record that creates the possibility of an error. Equipment, management, environment, people, and then other. And you try to find multiple different things in each of these buckets that, again, contributed to the medical error. And I wonder if it would be, and I recognize that there's a lot of difficulty in actually implementing this because of the lack of transparency within the police departments. But I wonder if doing what we call a root cause analysis in the medical field would provide some insight into how to prevent these things from happening and build that wall, as Steve says. In that, one of the things that we know in this situation was that Derek Chauvin knew George Floyd, and apparently there must have been some conflict. I was just reading today in an article that there had been conflict in their workplace, it sounds like, between them. And so, and Steve and Dorian might feel differently on this, but I doubt that Derek Chauvin went to work that day thinking, I'm going to kill George Floyd, let alone I'm going to kill anybody. And
opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, the opportunity presented itself, and maybe there were other, like you talked about before, Dorian, he felt disrespected, and I've got to show it to this guy that I'm worthy of being respected.
No, which one?
Sorry, what?
Which one? Was it Chauvin or Floyd?
No, Chauvin, that he felt, hey, Floyd is disrespecting me, and I've got to show him I deserve respect, and I've got to show him that.
Right.
And maybe that was even amplified because they knew each other.
Right.
They had conflicts in the workplace. And so if we did, these kinds of analyses of any events like this, might that help us understand them a little bit better and help build some of the barriers that Steve's asking for, fully support as well, but that Steve's asking for, and that would prevent these kinds of events from happening in the future. And then also have a downstream effect of decreasing overall violence against Black men and other minorities. So I don't know. That's just one of the ideas that I've been kind of thinking about in my mind that in some way might be helpful in understanding some of these situations.
Well,
You said he didn't go to work that morning planning to kill George.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably agree.
Yeah.
But what he took with him is his authoritarian personality,
Mm-hmm.
the belief that he can get away with this because of the culture he's in, because of his skin color and his sense of superiority. So these, and we could list others, and because of the culture of the police with other officers who will observe and not intervene,
Right.
these are the things that are factors in the killing of George Floyd. Not necessarily the idea, I'm going to kill George Floyd today. Those factors could have played out with George, with LaShawn, with Delroy, with anyone, even Rosie, even Tamir Rice, who is a kid.
Mm-hmm.
The system that we need in place is one that's going to mitigate that spilling over and causing harm. And I'm repeating myself actually.
Yeah. No, well, let me see if I hear you right, Steve.
Yeah.
Are you saying that this may not be a valuable approach, and I'm willing to to accept this, but this may not be a valuable approach because the similarities between all of these events are so similar that there may not be any value added by doing the dissection.
Right, because you can't really, what is the term that you use for the medical thing?
Oh, root cause analysis.
Yeah, you can't do root cause analysis on the individual.
yeah.
Well,
You can't do it on the individual, but you can do it on his record,
right,
as an officer.
On the system, you can.
Yeah. So, and that's what, on the system you can. And so you could do it based on, like Dorian mentioned, his record. You could do it on, some of the approach. So for instance, with say Tamir Rice, what was the information conveyed in the call? How was that relayed to the officer? There's other aspects of that may have influenced the person that was responding to behave in the way that they did. And it ended in a horrific outcome.
Well, I think what Steve's getting at, I don't want to speak for you, but this is what I'm hearing, so let me know if this is right. He's saying, yeah, there's a lot of like individual little circumstances that happen, but the overall circumstance is that here's a system that has a group of people going, I can go in and beat the hell out of this guy who may have used a forged counterfeit $20 bill, maybe, and I'm not gonna, there's no repercussion for me. Mm-hmm. And that is, it's the little things are kind of side pieces, it sounds like, is what you're saying, which I agree with, is that those are the window dressing, but the root is the root analysis is going to say we've got a system that says that this guy thought he was going to get away with this.
And I can understand that that this may have limited value as far as understanding what what ended up in the result, but it does seem like taking into account some of the differences within a department, you may capture some of that within these, especially if you had, say, some type of team that kind of did these at a national level. They would be able to pick up on the differences between departments. They would be able to pick up on some of these things that might vary department to department. So I don't know, that's just one thought I have, but maybe it doesn't have utility.
I'm going to propose that we now wrap things up because we're over 2 hours.
Yeah,
I know.
You guys got stuck talking to two very verbose brothers. So
the same.
Sorry about that.
I mean, the systems are already there to build the wall. All you have to do is to analyze how the typical Black man is restricted and apply the same thing in the system to keep these people in line.
Yeah.
Any
last words?
My last point about that is I actually just watched a video where this woman on a stage asked an auditorium full of people, she said, please stand up if you want to be treated like Black people are treated in our country. And she said, nobody's standing up. I don't think you understood my question. Please stand up if you want to be treated the way that the Black people are treated in our country. And nobody stood up.
Because they understand it. They understand it.
Yeah, it's no secret. It's known. Well, no.
No, hell no. Hell no is what everyone says.
Yeah.
And so and I think I think you've touched on that fear a little bit, Steve, of like that there are people that are very afraid of losing their privilege. But the point is not to lose something. The point is to pull everyone else up here. Why are any of us afraid of a system that's going to kill us? So anyway,
we want to get away. And I think I heard somebody said this. It's not my own. We don't want a system that is not racist. We want a system that's anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very subtle difference.
Yeah.
Because I am not racist seems to me as equivalent to silence.
Yeah.
And we've seen so many white people who were silent, but who are not anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
In point is Mitt Romney. He would have been silent all along, but he said, Black Lives Matter. That's a statement of anti-racism. That's different than said, well, there's trouble on both sides. Who is racist here? So that's the kind of spirit that we need to help us to build that wall of anti-superiority. Not the person themselves, but the wall is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I
don't have 20 generations to transform everybody.
Thank you both so much.
Let's put it that way. You don't. Your years are numbered just as mine are. We wouldn't be able to do that in this lifetime.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up, and then I think we can kind of stay on just for a couple minutes and talk amongst us. But I just want to say thank you guys so much. This has been incredibly insightful and fun for me. And I was just laughingly thinking to myself, we could call this episode like a psychologist, a cop, and two white guys that won't shut up walk into a bar or something.
I just want to credit you both for being good listeners.
Yeah.
I felt though, my feelings were heard, and I appreciate that. That makes a great deal of difference. So thank you both.
And I appreciate you guys having me here. So yeah.
Oh no, thank you for both joining us. It was an honor to hear your perspectives and really kind of see how this has affected both of your lives. And then also, what kind of change can we expect? Any last words that you have, Dorian and Steve, on this topic?
I just hope that, groups have more conversations like this, because it's hard to really be visceral against somebody that you're actually talking to.
Yeah.
And there is just so much more that you can know and learn. And I just hope that this conversation will continue everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that, it's difficult to really have a standing answer that would make this stuff go away. Some of the suggestions that Steve made, right on the money. Both of you guys, same thing, and that means to me, when I hear both of you talking, and that means you have some understanding of, this isn't right, and there needs to be a change. So this kind of dialogue is what helps to bring that out. It's funny because I know that our pastor, white guy from South Africa, said the same thing. He goes, something similar. If anyone would change places with some of these black folks in here, stand up. And not one person stood up.
Yeah.
because they, in their minds, they already know the same thing is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think of like, just thinking of South Africa and the fact that someone like Nelson Mandela that had been in prison for the color of his skin for 27 years could come out and say, we need truth and reconciliation. That gives me a lot of hope for society. Like if somebody can come out of those circumstances and say that this is what we need, it's going to be hard and dirty and messy, but that gives me so much hope for
That's a lot of staying power, as they say.
Yeah.
27 years? Wow.
Yeah.
That was a man that was, even when he was in prison, he was truly free.
Yeah. All right. I am